Government soft landings really is about making sure that we look at the long-term purpose of the asset and that we understand whether or not that's being delivered from the asset creation. We don't build buildings just to have a new building. We build a new building to have a school, to educate people, to gain access to the wider community, to provide facilities, and we need to understand how well those are being delivered through our choices. That's really what essentially soft landings is about achieving that through engagement with the end user. The purpose and the hypothesis behind soft landings, by using this approach, and you will see this approach as I move on, we can actually gain benefits in performance in terms of the value and in terms of the cost, the value that the asset gives us, and also in terms of performance from the asset. And we need to test our policy against a number of areas. We need to make sure that does the policy add value? Is it understandable through the smaller and the larger suppliers as well? Can it be applied to infrastructure as well as to buildings? Can it be verifiable? So can we make sure we know it's working? And it will not conflict with other government policy. And also, what we're looking for in terms of yourself that you picked up on, Andrew, which was around the 3-year compliance. So we're looking to make sure at minimum that when assets come into use, we're looking at the performance of that asset for 3 years in use to see whether or not it meets our original expectations. So what are some of the problems that we've got with assets at the moment that we receive in government? So from a designer's perspective, do we learn from mistakes? When we're looking in terms of actually constructing, does the information accurately reflect what we need? Does it get there on time? And in terms of commissioning, and there's a big area of opportunity for commissioning as well. Are we expecting too much in too short an amount of time? Do we end up with a job half done? When we start looking to the operation of the asset, again, massive potential areas for improvement in terms of understanding what people need, and in terms of how they access these areas and how they maintain them as well. Also the stakeholders, which we think is a real big opportunity in terms of the whole process to involve the stakeholders much more. At the moment, they're very isolated away from the design and the process that takes place. And actually, sometimes they don't get solutions that work because of a lack of communication. And the client needs to look at this and see the end result that they get. We don't want surprises. We want things that do what they're supposed to do. And we want to also join up the internal bits of the client as well, and avoid this sort of circle of waste that we've got here. We've got waste that goes out through all of this sort of lack of communication, lack of understanding and lack of involvement. And soft landings is there to overcome those problems as well. So what we're looking for from soft landings is to make sure that we engage with end users throughout the design process and the delivery process. And this engagement through the end users will be through what we're calling a government soft landings champion. We need this person to be able to communicate with those users, communicate their needs, and keep the business requirements focused as we go through the project design and delivery and operations process. We need to also be able to set very clear measures and targets for 3 areas, we think, for all capital investment. We should be able to see what the functionality and effectiveness is. So how well does that design? So for example, in terms of the hospital, we looked at the hospital, how easy is it to move patients from one area to another area? What's the sort of travelling times like? So we need to look at the functionality and effectiveness of the asset that we're creating. We need to look at the in-use costs of it. The majority of the cost of the asset is in terms of what benefit does that deliver to the business. Then the next cost is around how much does it cost to operate it and own it. And then finally, the smallest cost is around the capital cost and the design cost. So we really need to bring our focus forward into the life of that asset. We need to look at environmental performance as well, and how much it costs to run and maintain this during its use. The commissioning process is an area where there's an awful lot of opportunity for improvement, is my own perception. And I think we can do that through sort of working and working in terms of the training and the handover, and making sure that the end users are involved in that. So it's not just a matter of getting the whole series in their hands. It's actually people know how to person knows that. The users need to know this, because otherwise we don't get the performance that we've asked for, and your design does not perform as needed. We need to look at the performance against those measures for, we think, at least 3 years as well. And this needs to be a partnership approach, so we want to work there with the contractor and with the designer and with the operator to understand how well have our targets been met. Is there something we need to do different in terms of the maintenance or in terms of the running of that facility, or the way that we use it to make sure that we achieve those targets? And that needs to be a collaborative process as well. And to make sure that the design does work, I think an awful lot of assets in use, particularly buildings, what happens is that it's seen as a construction process, the job is done, commissioning is done, right, we've met all the targets, we're off. What we want to do is we want to keep that skills and some of those expertise involved in that project, maybe coming back periodically for up to a year initially and saying, right, okay, this is the way you're using it, maybe you should be using it like this. That way we will get better performance. And we need to link that knowledge that's been put into the design process with the operations and with the end use of the asset. That way we should save some more money as well. Our policy, and I won't dwell too much on this, reflects those points. So we need to use soft landings as a policy. We need departments. We talked about those 3 areas of measures, and we're going to call those the golden thread. We need to keep a focus on those areas. We need to have an active process in terms of aftercare, and we need to make sure that we do use in-use or post-operational evaluation as a collaborative tool. And BIM supports all of this. This is sort of through BIM. There's a series of information points. At those information points, we can start to collect data about performance, what we expect it should be, and then from that we can see whether or not we're on track in the design and whether or not the operation meets our expected outcomes. And we're saying there's activities here against the policy that we think people should be doing. So clients need to clearly identify the stakeholders, and we need to be more intelligent in terms of clients and making sure that we know what the targets are for this capital investment. Sometimes these can just be lost. You know, what will happen is that they end up being a really big focus on the capital expenditure and the time. We forget some of the other targets that we should be for this asset. We need to understand what skills are available to operate it and what measures we're going to have in place and how we're going to collect them, and fine-tuning who's going to be involved in that. So for the supplier can say when decisions are needed, what these client measures look like in terms of their own targets, and what the programme should be for commissioning and training, and how we will identify key activities in terms of the performance. So for example, we say that energy consumption should be around a certain level, the target, but that target is dependent upon how many people are in that building, what the hours of operation are, whether or not we're doing the maintenance. This needs to be understood, and the reason for any variance from that target. So the operator side, again, an area that's sort of very often missed. We want this expertise involved right as soon as we can in terms of the project. We need their expertise in understanding the in-use cost impacts as well. What the savings can be brought from in terms of better efficiency, we just heard it about in terms of the door stocks. You know, £5 to save how many thousands of pounds. What skills are needed, and this is particularly an area when working with the county council that I've found in terms of, you know, we end up with really brilliant designs for schools or educational establishments, but actually we need to make sure that people are running them and operating them have the appropriate skills or we alter the design. We need to match those two up. And also, on the operations side, we want them getting really hot on change control. So in terms of, we start putting more people in the space, this will affect its performance, and we need that to be recorded and understand that. This ties in with BIM, and I won't dwell too much on this diagram, but we need to look at the key aspects of soft landings are looking at the commissioning, training, handover, the financial performance, and the environment. And 3 of those areas are really sort of focused on in terms of the measures, but also it's a partnership between the operational and the construction side. This runs all the way through the life of the project, and then you'll see there's a series of data drops, similar to the gateways, where information needs to be passed across at these stages, and we need to consider these requirements throughout the stages by looking at what the objectives are for the project, understanding and modelling these, and then checking and confirming the plans and assumptions that we have in place, handing over the documentation, handing over the asset, and then seeing how well it works in use. Most importantly is capturing and understanding what we know about the performance of that asset in use against what we've planned and what we're doing. That really is quite a concise summary of soft landings. So hopefully that's helpful, and feel free to ask away with questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Guys, if you have any questions at all, now's the time to ask them. Preferably not for me, but for Andrew or Roy, please ask away.
Shall I start with Paul Lowry? Just Roy,